Well, wanted to give you an update. Many of you have been praying over the last couple of weeks for Sam Felixa. If you remember the prayer request that went out for Sam, he underwent major open heart surgery. He had an aortic valve transplant, and it was a week ago Tuesday that he had that surgery. And it was great to have him and to have his parents. Debbie and I are real good friends with his parents, and they're here. They were in from Montana and came into Philadelphia to Children's Hospital to have the surgery. And amazingly, despite this major surgery, Sam bounced back pretty quickly from it. And last Sunday, he was discharged from the hospital. Now, he couldn't quite go back to Montana. He had to stay here for a few days for a couple follow-ups, but it was pretty cool. He was here with his mom for a few days, and we got a few more days to spend with him. And this past Tuesday, I took Sam and his mom back to Philadelphia to some follow-up appointments he had Tuesday morning. And then when I picked them up from those appointments, I decided I'd kind of take a little detour on the way back to their hotel and go hit some of the city's iconic landmarks, because it was the first time either had been in Philly. So we went and drove around the city for a little bit, and one I was most excited about taking them to was to the Art Museum. See the steps and the Rocky statue and everything like that. So we pulled out in front of the museum, and there wasn't that much traffic, so I just pulled over on the curb and put on the hazard lights, and Sam got out, and he went over to the Rocky statue and was looking at it and taking some pictures and things like that. And then, to my surprise, and to Nicole, his mom's surprise, Sam began walking up the steps of the Art Museum. And he kept walking until eventually he reached the top of the steps. And he turned around and looked back on the skyline, right? And his mom then kind of ran up after him, wondering about that. And as I kind of was just down on the street, I'm speechless. I'm just like, man, 7 days ago, he lay with his chest open on life support. And here he is, walking up the Art Museum steps as a 14-year-old, with his arms raised in victory, kind of like Rocky Balboa. It was so cool. Well, anyway, as he went up there, I'm sitting there thinking about what I had just seen at the Rocky statue. At the base of the Rocky statue, there's a plaque, and it's a quote from Rocky Balboa from the movie. And here's what it says as I'm looking at Sam. It says, "It's not how hard you hit, it's how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. That's how winning is done." And I just thought of Sam. Anyway, when he got back down the steps and came back in the car, we started to drive off, and I turned to him and I said, Sam, that was pretty cool. In fact, that was so Philly of you. Epic, Well, with this in mind, it's no coincidence that today we look at a letter from Jesus to the church in the city of Philadelphia. So if you have your Bibles, you can open up to Revelation chapter 3 and kind of keep your Bible open to that just so you can follow along, because we're going to be keep coming back to it this morning. But we're continuing our series this morning, Awaken. Being a faithful church in an unfaithful world, where we've been looking at these letters written to 7 different churches that encourage not only these churches, but also us today to be faithful in following Jesus, and faithful as we reflect Jesus in an ever-worsening world. So we're going to look and see how this letter opens. It starts in verse 7. Of Revelation 3. And let's just kind of read through it. We'll make commentary as we go through. It says, "And to the angel of the church of Philadelphia write, the words of the Holy One, the true One, who has the key of David, who opens and no one will shut, and who shuts and no one opens." So this is the introduction to the letter. It's basically addressed here to the spiritual leadership of the church in the city of Philadelphia. Now, this Philadelphia, it's not our Philly, not across the river. It's not like, that wasn't around back then. This Philadelphia is a city that's located in Asia Minor. It's actually about 30 miles from the city of Sardis that we looked at last week. So just to kind of give you an idea. And the city was established by this guy, King Attalus. And it was its name was inspired by his devotion to his brother, Eusmenes. Okay, so the city of brotherly love is what Philadelphia means. So it's him and his brother. Anyway, the city of Philadelphia, it was a center, it was a hub of Hellenism in that whole entire region. Hellenism is basically the spread of the Greek language and Greek culture and Greek learning throughout the entire world. It started under Alexander the Great. And this city of Philadelphia was one of the hubs for spreading this message of Hellenism throughout all of Asia Minor. So it was a pretty key city. And it was also known as Little Athens because of this, and because of its beautiful temples that rivaled Athens. And in the city of Philadelphia, there was also a large Jewish population that was there. Now, the city, geographically, lay in the mountains, and it actually was in a narrow pass in between the mountains. And this pass was the major trade route from east to west in the Roman Empire. So it's kind of in this narrow pass. Everybody had to pass through Philadelphia. So in a lot of ways, Philadelphia is this gateway city. They kind of held the key to their door that would regulate trade. So they could open trade or they could close trade just by saying you can't come through. So it was a pretty important city, and it's important to know that kind of location when we hear the description of Jesus, because Jesus then describes himself. He says, who's writing this letter? Well, I am Jesus, right? And he says, here's who I am for you. I'm the Holy One. And in saying that, he's saying, I'm perfect. I'm unlike any others. That's what holy means, right? Other. So he says, I'm perfect and unlike any other. I'm the true one. So he says, not only am I holy or perfect, but I'm true. Basically, I'm to be revered and trusted above all. Then he says, he holds the key of David. Now, what does this mean? Well, this is actually a description of Jesus given all the way back in Isaiah chapter 22, that describes, he will come with the key of David, and what he opens, no one will be able to shut, and what he shuts, no one will be able to open. So imagine this power that Jesus is describing himself as, right? He says, my plans and power at my disposal are absolute. I hold the key to David, this royalty, this authority that I come with. And what I say goes. If I say this is open, doesn't matter how much you want it shut, it's not getting shut. And if something's shut or closed, he says, no matter how much you want it open, it's not going to open unless I say so. So Jesus kind of putting him as the all-being. In fact, Jesus describes himself kind of like this back in the Gospel of John, where he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me, right? So he's basically, we are nothing and can do nothing apart from Jesus. And who is this Jesus? So what does this Jesus have to say to this church in this city of Philadelphia? Well, it continues in verse 8. So let's continue reading. He says, I know your works. Behold, I have set before you an open door which no one is able to shut. I know that you have but little power, and yet you have kept my word and have not denied my name. Behold, I will make those of the synagogue of Satan who say they are Jews and are not, but lie. Behold, I will make them come and bow down before your feet, and they will learn that I have loved you. Because you've kept my word and about patient endurance, I will keep you from the hour of trial that is coming on the whole world to try those who dwell on the earth. I am coming soon. Hold fast what you have, so that no one may seize your crown. To the one who conquers, I will make a pillar in the temple of my God. Never shall he go out of it. And I will write on him the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the New Jerusalem, which comes down from my God out of heaven, and my own new name. Then he closes like all the letters. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. So, it's a lot here, isn't there? And some of it sounds a little confusing. We're going to jump into this. But basically, unlike the previous letter to Sardis, where it was mostly this complaint against them, right? Jesus here shares only the commendable with the church of Philadelphia. There's no real complaint against them. There's no, you failed to do this or anything like this, right? Jesus opens and he says, I know your works, or I know your ministry and what you've been doing, and it's good, right? Not only that, he says, you've kept my word. You've kept to the gospel. You haven't denied my name. And on top of that, you've patiently endured, some of these trials and persecution that you're facing. And Jesus also notes something else. He says, but you have but little power. And what's he talking about here? Well, here's what he's saying to the church. He's saying, I know you're small. Obviously, the church in Philadelphia, it's smaller compared to maybe some of the other churches and compared to all of the other powers in the city. Really, there's not much, right? And he says, so basically, you're small, and you can't do everything. You have limited resources at your disposal. Now, being a smaller congregation, hopefully we at Joy, we can kind of relate to this church of Philadelphia in that regard, right? And knowing that being small, we have limited things that we can do and can't do, right? So he says, yeah, I realize you have little power, but you're still doing a lot with your little power, or with what you have. Now, while things are good with the church in Philadelphia, they're still facing opposition. They're still facing troubles. And it seems, the opposition's coming from the Jews that are in the city there. Now, these Jews in the city, they're not religious Jews. They're more cultural Jews. So Jews in name only, right? That's what Jesus says. They claim to be Jews, but they're really not, which means they're just kind of Jewish descent, but they have no bent towards religion or worshiping God. So it's through this lens, right? This small church that's trying to keep faithful, right? Trying to remain faithful and make an impact, but are facing some trials, some opposition. It's through this lens that we need to look at the rest of this letter, or that we should view the rest of this letter, because when we view it through this lens, we see what Jesus is doing here. And what he's doing in this letter is he's encouraging this church. And he's also encouraging us, right? He's encouraging us more than just, don't give up. He's really encouraging them to keep moving forward. He says, I'm not just saying just don't stop, but keep moving forward. Keep going. Keep following me. In fact, as we look closer at this letter, what we find is we find Jesus, the one who calls and equips us to keep following him as a church and as individuals. You see, what we discover as we kind of dig deeper, and we're going to dig deeper into what this letter is talking about, what we discover is that, first of all, we can keep moving forward even when the world stands against us, when we face obstacles. We can keep moving forward because, first of all, as we see here, it's Jesus who opens and closes doors. It's Jesus that opens and closes doors. Jesus says, hey, I've set before you an open door that no one can close. And what are these doors? Well, by a door, he's meaning an opportunity for ministry, an opportunity to follow me, to make an impact in your world right in front of you. I've opened a door for this. So Jesus has opened a door for them to walk through. However, there seems to be an issue here that's implied by him noting that he's opening a door. And that's this. They're trying to walk somewhere else than this open door, or Jesus wouldn't be saying, I open this door. They would have already seen it. So they're looking somewhere else. It seems they're trying to go through a door, a different door, a door that might be closed. And Jesus is saying, but you have little power. You can't do both. Being small, they can only do so much. So that's what's most likely happening. So what they need to be doing is going where Jesus is leading them. So Jesus is saying, I want you to go where you're leading me. And it might not be where you're looking. Rather, I've opened another door for you. You see, Jesus can open doors, but Jesus can also close doors. and they're going towards a closed door. In fact, we see this Jesus opening and closing doors other places in Scripture, in Acts, where Paul's on his missionary journeys, right? And it says in Acts 16, and when they'd come up to Mysia, okay, Mysia's up in northern Turkey or northern Asia Minor there, they attempted to go into Bithynia. Bithynia is actually north around the Black Sea, up through the Caucasus Mountains into Russia, and that's where Paul wanted to go. And it says, but the Spirit of Jesus did not allow them. Jesus closed that door. So, passing by Mysia, they went down to Troas. And it seems to be what might be happening here is that there's a closed door. So what is this closed door that maybe the church in Philadelphia is trying to go in? No, Jesus is mentioning, no, I've opened another door for you that won't be closed. So where are they putting their attention? Maybe that God's trying to say, I want you over here. Well, the only thing that's mentioned here is the Jews. Right? Most likely what's happening is the church in Philadelphia saying, we're trying to reach the Jews in our city. Much like Paul did and does when he was entering cities. In fact, Paul probably planted the church here in Philadelphia. But when Paul would enter into a city, the first place Paul would go was to the synagogues. And that would be where he would start his ministry in the city. So he would start with the Jews. So the church in Philadelphia is probably saying, well, this is what Paul did, so we're going to do what Paul did and go in this direction. But they're starting to hit a wall, right? They're starting to hit a wall in doing that. They're not making any inroads. In fact, Jesus describes these Jews, right? They're hard. He refers to them as a synagogue of Satan. Now, he referred to them, to the church in Smyrna, as the same thing, that they're standing in opposition for you. They're not wanting to respond to you. Okay? They don't want to be with you. They want to oppose you. That's why you're hitting a wall. Okay? Again, they're these Jews kind of in name only. They're not spiritually minded. So it's not because of the church in Philadelphia, their lack of faith or their lack of effort or that they're not doing ministry well. They're doing ministry well. He says, I know your works. They're good. But rather, they're not making inroads here because Jesus has closed that door. And he's saying, I have someplace else for you to focus your attention. So Jesus tells them, there's another door open that no one can shut, that I want you to walk through. And we're never told what that is, but it's probably then the Gentiles or some other ministry for them to be doing. Again, though, it's Jesus who opens and closes doors. And Jesus does that for us as well. Jesus is constantly opening doors for us to walk into, opportunities that he places before us, but he also closes doors for us. Have you ever tried to witness to someone and you're like, man, they just need to come to Christ, and or to do ministry somewhere, and although you did it really well, just you got no results. You didn't seem to get anywhere. And you're like hitting a wall, and you just keep going, and you're getting frustrated, and you're getting tired, and all these things. Well, it may be that in that area, God is closing that door for a time to spare you pain, or to spare exhaustion, or he's closing that door because he has some other door for you to go in that you can soar in. You see, the reality is that a closed door is just as valuable as an open door. Did you catch that? A closed door is just as valuable as an open door for us when we know that Jesus is doing it. I mean, there's a lot as a church and as individuals that we can be doing. The needs are endless, aren't they? But there's far fewer things that we should be doing or that we're able to do. Jesus, he opens doors and he closes doors so that we not only rely on him for leading, but also so that we can make the best use of our time and our energy so that we can be most effective. And that's kind of what's happening here, right? We can only do so much, especially as a small church. So recognizing God opened and closed doors, it's a blessing. It's a gift that Jesus gives us so that we can keep moving forward. Isn't that cool? But that's not all Jesus is saying here. He also says that, we can move forward in this church in Philadelphia, can keep moving forward because it's Jesus who changes hearts. Do you know that it's not our job? It's not within our power to save people. Do you know that? It's not our job to make people believe in the gospel. That's not our job. You know what our job is? You know what our call is that God gives us? It's this: to simply bear faithful witness and reflect Jesus so he can be seen in and through our lives. That's our call. It's only God who can change a person's mind and change a person's heart. This is God's job. In fact, Jeremiah talks about this when he's talking about the Jews. He says, I will give them a heart to know that I am the Lord, and they shall be my people, and I will be their God, for they shall return to me with their whole heart. God says, I'm going to cause them to do that. So here in Philadelphia, even though God seems to be closing a door to ministry, the Jews, this ministry to the Jews, and he opens up another, those Jews aren't necessarily a lost cause. In fact, Jesus tells them at the end of verse 9, what does he say? He says, behold, I will make them. You notice that? He will make them. He will make them come and bow down before your feet, and they will learn that I have loved you. Now, this coming to them and bowing down, it may be that they're going to come for salvation, or it may be referring to when Jesus finally returns in victory and it says every knee will bow and every tongue will confess. We're not told exactly when this is going to happen, but regardless of that, the promise is that Jesus will make them do this. Jesus will take care of this. And this truth accomplishes a couple things. First, it encourages the believers there, and it encourages us, that their work in that area, even though there's a closed door, that work wasn't in vain, because God is continuing to work. And they're going to be seen that they loved the Jews and that they were there for them. But it's going to encourage them, even though that door's closed, their work wasn't in vain. It's also going to free them from feeling like they were a failure in that area. They were faithful. So don't feel like you're a failure here. Don't feel guilty that you went to a different door that God opened for you. Just realize that's God leading you. God, it's power to change a heart. It frees us as well. Do you know that? Because it's God who works. It frees us from thinking that our witness, our knowledge, our perfect presentation of the gospel is the deciding factor for someone coming to Jesus. It's not. Now, we're called to do that. We're called to share the gospel clearly and to talk about the hope that's in us, in Jesus, to people. But yet, ultimately, it's God that changes our hearts, a person's heart. In fact, some of the times where I messed up the gospel presentation, the worst is when somebody says, well, yeah, I want to come to faith in Christ. And I'm like, what? Did you just hear what I said? Obviously not, because Jesus was talking to him over me. And he changed a heart. So it frees us from thinking, well, it's all up to me, or it's all up to us. It also frees us to focus on those that God has called us to without feeling guilty for the other ones, for the ones that maybe God called our focus away from, and he calls us to these, but we don't have to feel guilty, or we don't have to feel like, you know what, but I need to do everything. Have you ever felt like that? Have you ever felt guilty because you can't do everything? I know as a pastor here at Joy, I mean, this is one of the things that keeps me up at night sometimes. And so this speaks to me because a lot of times I'll feel guilt and I'll feel failure, when we can't do all the things that I see that we could be doing. And you hear people being upset or the people leaving and they said, you guys failed and all this. It crushes. And you're sitting here going, what are we doing wrong? We can't. And we see all this, but we can't meet all the needs equally. And you know what God's saying right here? And this is why this was so cool this week when I'm looking at this. He's encouraging us. And he says, Jesus has got this. He's the one that's going to accomplish all of this. And some of it he's going to accomplish through us. And some he's going to accomplish through others that he brings to do that. So some things he may accomplish through our church, some he might do through another church. But God's on this, and that's really what it's about. Can you relate to that? Well then, be encouraged. Only Jesus can change hearts, which frees us to simply follow him and simply rely on him as he leads us. Anyway, then Jesus continues, right? And with more encouragement for this church, because he commends them and he says, not only have you kept my word, not denied me, but you've kept my word to endure patiently. So you've been enduring this persecution, right? In fact, here's what he says in verse 10. He says, because you've done that, I'm going to keep you from the hour of trial that is coming on the whole world to try those who dwell on the earth, right? Now, this hour of trial that he's talking about, it may or may not be what's called the Great Tribulation that's mentioned later on in Revelation. It's not specific here in what it is. Okay? It could just be those trials that we face following Jesus as we get closer to his return in an ever-worsening world as it becomes more on us. Okay? Really, Jesus isn't trying to teach us theology about the Great Tribulation here. Instead, he's trying to encourage. Okay? So we need to understand it in that vein. And the word here, from, that he's going to keep us from or hold us from this hour of trial, that word meaning from is a Greek word that can also mean in or in the midst of. So it's not that he's saying necessarily that I'm going to keep you out of this. I may just hold you in this. I'll be with you in this. Okay, so again, it's not teaching this theology of the Great Tribulation here. It does that later on. But rather, Jesus is encouraging us to hold fast, right? He says, hold fast, or keep moving forward in the face of opposition, because it's Jesus who protects. So Jesus is claiming something else about himself. He says, not only do I open doors and close doors, not only am I the one who changes hearts, but I'm the one who will protect you. Jesus will keep us from being destroyed by the trials that come to us, so that no one, as he says in verse 11, can seize our crown. Okay, and that crown refers to when Jesus comes, we're going to take our crown or our service to him and give it to him, lay it down at his feet in worship. So basically what he's saying is no one will be able to rob us of our joy in worshiping Jesus, our joy in Jesus. Jesus talks about this in the Gospel of John, where he says, I give them eternal life, those that are mine, and they will never perish, and no one will snatch them out of my hand. Jesus says, I will keep you in this. I will hold you. I will protect you. So Jesus is promising to protect us from being defeated. That doesn't mean we're never going to fail. It doesn't mean we're never going to experience pain. But what it means is he will always eventually lead us to victory, because Jesus always wins. He protects us so that we can boldly follow him wherever he leads through those open doors. And then finally in this letter, it closes with this blessing to those who conquer, right? Look at verse 12. It says, to the ones that conquer, right? And so he gives us blessings to those who conquer or remain faithful. And he notes in verse 12, first of all, those that conquer, those that are faithful in this, will be made a pillar in his temple, and he'll never leave. Okay, you'll remain there forever. Now, what it's talking about with the temple of God here, it's not talking about a building. Rather, it's talking about us. Paul in 1 Corinthians says this, right? Do you not know that you are God's temple and that God's Spirit dwells in you? So he's saying, basically, you know what? We're going to be pillars of the church. We're going to be the ones that help carry the weight and of ministry. You're going to be a key to what God is doing in and through the church if you remain faithful. And not only this, he says, but in addition to this, God's going to write all over you. Okay? Like a tattoo that can never be rubbed off and for everybody to see, basically. And he says, well, what's he going to write all over us? Well, he says 3 things God's going to write on us. He's going to mark us, right? First, he's going to write on us the name of God. So it's going to be written on us that we belong to, or property of God. Okay? That he is ours and we are his. Second, he says, I'm going to write the name of God's city on you. And he says the New Jerusalem, which is going to come down. Now in Revelation 21, it talks about this New Jerusalem when Jesus comes in final victory, that this New Jerusalem is going to come out of heaven for then the saints, or the holy ones, the faithful ones, to then go in and dwell. Okay, so it's God's city for his people. Now, more than just a physical city, here's what this New Jerusalem represents and why the name is important. Because it's representing God's eternal kingdom and the promise of eternity with him. So he says, I'm going to write your name, and I'm going to mark you to say that you're mine, and you will be with me always. And then he says, I'm also going to write on you my own new name. Now, what is this? What this is, we're not really told what this new name is. But it's going to be something new, and it's going to be something personal, because he says it's my own new name that I'm going to write on you. But what this speaks of Jesus saying this, is this ongoing relationship with Jesus. So we're going to be marked by this so that everybody can see, and so that we're always going to be reminded, right, that first we belong to God, that we have an eternal place with him, and an ongoing relationship with Jesus. And everybody's going to see it. Okay, so it marks us as belonging or identified by Jesus. In other words, he's saying that, you know what, we can also keep moving forward in the face of opposition because it's Jesus who defines us. Jesus defines who we are. It's Jesus that holds us up before others as anything. When we trust Jesus, we're no longer seen as who we were. We're no longer defined by our sin or our shame or our failures. Rather, Paul talks in 2 Corinthians, that we're new creations, right? So we're seen now through the perfection of Jesus. Meaning that when others see us, they're going to see Jesus in and through us. This is the beautiful promise that Paul gives in Colossians chapter 3, where he talks about, for you died, for you trusted in Jesus, and now your life is hidden with Christ in God. But when Christ appears, Christ who is your life, defines us, right? When he appears, then you will also appear with him in glory. Which means when Jesus is revealed, we're going to be revealed as his. What's this saying? It's saying that everybody's going to see us as his. And when they look at us, they're going to see Jesus. That's a cool promise, isn't it? To remain faithful. When we trust in Jesus, our lives reflect him for our world to see, for our family to see, for our friends, for our coworkers, for our neighbors to see. Everybody's going to see Jesus in us. So, Jesus is the Holy One, right? He's the true one. He's the key, right? Our key for being faithful in an unfaithful world. So hopefully this morning, this passage it encourages you. I know it's encouraged me. I can't tell you how much this passage this morning encourages me to remember that it's about Jesus. Not only as an individual it encourages me, but it encourages me as part of this church and in this church family. So I hope it encourages you as a member of Joy Community Fellowship. We're a small church, right? Over the last year, it hasn't been easy, right? We've gotten beat up by COVID, by all the restrictions, right? By the lockdown. We've had weaknesses in what we do and what we can do. They've gotten exposed, and some of them have been ripped raw. But also, we've seen God open doors for us, for new ministry and exciting ways to do things. God is still working. We can keep moving forward as we follow him. So as we look ahead, as we begin once again to move forward as individuals and as a church in following Jesus, what do? Well, we look for the open doors. We trust him to change hearts. We rest securely in his protection, and we stand tall as we are reflected, or as he's reflected in and through our lives and in and through our ministry. That's our promise this morning. You know, we're faithful in an unfaithful world when we keep moving forward, following Jesus as he leads us. That's our call. That's our promise. Let's pray.